Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness.
Let's get started.
Excellent. So if you didn't recognize that voice, you should have. That was Brad Kearns. And we are lucky enough to have Brad on the show today. If you have been hiding under a rock and you're not sure who Brad Kearns is, he had a 9-year career as a professional athlete, having 30 wins worldwide on the Pro Circuit Tour. And I believe he still holds the record for the Hawaii Ironman 24 and under age division, American record of 8 hours and 57 minutes. So today, Brad spends his time playing speed golf. That is when he's not running his successful Primal Endurance podcast or working with health and fitness expert Mark Sisson on a comprehensive lifestyle movement called, if you haven't already heard, the Primal Blueprint. So in 2016, Brad and Mark authored the Primal Endurance, a healthy, stress balanced, fat adapted primal approach to training. And this year, I heard a rumor that you guys might be releasing a book regarding your own experience with the keto diet approach. Is this true, Mark? And welcome to the show. Sorry, Brad. I just called
you. We are so tight, Mark and I, and we've done so much good work with the primal movement. And I'm so glad to be, Mark and I are old friends for almost 30 years now. And we started out connecting in the sport of triathlon, where Mark was my coach when I competed as a professional back in the 80s and 90s. And Mark's a little older than me. I hope to look as good as he does when I'm 64. I'm 52. But back then, he was kind of retired and done with his athletic efforts. He was a 2:18 marathoner and took fourth in Hawaii Ironman in 1982. So I came along after that and looked up to him. And he had such a unique approach to training that, some of this stuff was so novel back then in the 80s, when it was just the days of high mileage and who could train the most. And that's who we thought would win every race. And he was starting to, rethink that picture and talk about breakthrough workouts and then resting afterward and kind of balancing stress and rest in a way that was unusual to the typical, type A, overly competitive, driven endurance athlete that just wanted to go out there every day and work their butt off until they were exhausted. So, that was an interesting start for both of us, having our roots in the endurance world and then promoting primal living and the whole primal paleo evolutionary health scene over the last decade. But then, as you referenced, last year, we released this book called Primal Endurance, and it was really fun because we got to go back to our roots and connect with this community that's been, building and growing and expanding so amazingly in recent years, to where, now like triathlon and marathon and ultra marathon running are just routine elements of the culture rather than crazy stuff that no one's heard about. And you have to explain what the 3 sports are to your passenger next to you on the airplane and all that stuff. So we're taking those primal paleo ancestral health elements and injecting the message into the specific goal of pursuing these compelling challenges on the endurance scene, which it's so easy to get out of balance and overtrained and exhausted and fatigued from a chronic approach to exercise rather than a balanced and measured one.
Yeah. And so, Brad, would you consider yourself one of these type A personalities that was potentially overtraining and that sort of thing before you met Mark? How did that all come about?
That's a good question. I like that because I think, through my experience as an athlete and going all the way to, making it my career and my, compelling goal every single day to get up out of bed. And I was a professional for 9 years, and that was, a pretty intense experience. And through the intensity of athletics, you learn the lessons of life in a very powerful and dramatic manner. So when I had personality frailties or insecurities or things like that, they always played out on the race course. So when I got into this type A overly competitive mode, which, we're all capable of, and tried to rush the process of fitness, for example, I would suffer and I would get injured or I would get burnt out, and I'd have to recalibrate and say, look, just because you want it really bad doesn't mean that it's going to happen for you if you're a dumbass and you train yourself into the ground. So it was a great experience along the way to constantly learn, especially from failure and from struggling, how I could, get better as a person as well as an athlete. So Mark was a big part of that because he made the same mistakes himself, and he trained himself into the ground, and he ruined his joints, and he had all kinds of health problems as a young man who was, rip city and dropping 218 marathons, but inside was, struggling and suffering with his health. And, that's what's great about your message that you promote. There's health and there's fitness, and they're two separate and distinct things. They can be complementary if you're smart about it, or they can be totally at odds, which is what we see often with, the serious endurance athlete.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess this podcast is all about how do we get those two closer to meet? And I know Primal Endurance is all about that. And at Primal Endurance, you guys advocate the math style training, which most of our clients are aware of. And if they're not, we'll have lots of references in the show notes. But basically 180 minus your age. And that's the heart rate that they should stay at, or as you mentioned, a lot of the times a lot below is okay too. And then I guess I've got a couple of questions around that alone. So firstly, whenever I see athletes who are hardcore type A personality, and basically we're saying slow down to get faster, and they take on this approach, do you see people give up? And if so, when, and how long should they stick to it before they give up?
That's great, Allie. Yeah, I hope we're jumping ahead okay for the listeners, because we're talking about emphasizing the development of the aerobic base as an endurance athlete. And aerobic means your ability to burn fat and process oxygen efficiently at comfortable intensity, as opposed to anaerobic or high intensity work. So there's this super important critical distinction between a predominantly aerobic workout and a workout that's drifting into the slightly anaerobic heart rates, that's slightly too stressful, that burns a greater percentage of glucose to fat and compromises the intended benefits of a training program to get you more and more efficient without burning out and breaking down. So the aerobic base building concept, as you referenced quickly, Dr. Phil Maffetone's been promoting this stuff for 30 years, and now it's finally coming into popularity, and people are like, what do you think about this math thing? And I'm like, well, I think the same thing I thought 30 years ago, that it's absolutely essential to continued progress and supporting your health while you pursue endurance goals. And to get to your question, do people give up? I want to present this concept also. If you go out there and you train harder and harder, you will get fitter faster, and you'll have a greater training response if you go out there and ride your bike at 23 miles an hour than you do if you go out there and ride 17 miles an hour. But the problem is we got to look at this big picture perspective, and the idea of taking the time to build a really strong, clean burning, fuel efficient engine like a Tesla. I don't know if they have Teslas over there in Asia yet, probably.
They're massive.
But you compare that to fine tuning and putting new parts into a tiny little old junk car that you're trying to get the most out of, but you're not taking good care of it, and it's not well built. And that's what I consider to be a high stress training program, where you get quick results. You get injured 4 times a year, and you get a cold 6 times a year, but you're, kind of accelerating the fitness process by pushing yourself really, really hard. And during that stress response phase, yeah, you can perform, if you go out there and run intervals 3 days a week, and then you go do a race, your body will adapt to that intense training stimulus by turning in a pretty good performance in the race. But then we got to check with you in a month, in 3 months, 6 months, or 3 years. Or, as we mentioned offline, 20 years later down the road, where you've abused your cardiovascular system and you have heart disease and disease risk factors that are elevated because of your commitment to athletics, rather than having you in the other category of being more healthy and less disease risk because of your commitment to athletics. So, yes, people quit all the time. They give it too little duration as a test period, when they have to slow down and train at strictly aerobic heart rates. And it's a shame, because we know this works. It's been proven by the performances of the world's great endurance athletes in every sport for around the last 60 years, starting down in your neck of the woods in New Zealand with Arthur Lydiard, the great running coach, with his proteges, Peter Snell, and all the people that came after him that were winning Olympic gold medals by emphasizing aerobic training. And, Peter Snell's now an exercise physiologist of a great note in his career. And I got a great quote from him in the book where he said, this was 60 years ago, and people are still thinking that these methods are questionable. And he's like, my record still holds in New Zealand for the 800 meters at 1:44. I think Nick Willis might have broken it recently, but, it's been going on and proven that training slow helps you go fast in a race. And you have to learn a little bit about the physiology to make this thing stick in your brain and make sense. But it's absolutely true. It's been proven true. And people still second guess it. Or, like I mentioned in myself, their personality weaknesses and their overly competitive instinct and impatience causes them to kind of disengage from reality and push themselves super hard so that they can catch up to their training partners without regard for their long-term health consequences or even their development as athletes.
I think you hit the nail on the head, actually. I think it's a lot to do with ego and seeing that training partner pass you. It's like, no, wait there, I'm faster than them. Surely they can't be going faster than me. I have to catch up or I have to beat them up the hill. So it's a lot about discipline, isn't it?
Well, it's about getting clear about your goals and purpose for being an athlete and then behaving in a manner congruent with your stated goals and purposes. And I remember this guy that I used to ride with once in a while. He was a funny guy. His name was Warren. He was very, very fit, and he could climb like anybody on the bike. I mean, he would just take off. And I said, wow, man. He was kind of older too. He was in his 40s. I was in my 20s. And I'm like, dude, you're pretty strong. Mate, you're quite strong out there. And I said, so what kind of racing do you do? You got some races coming up? And he goes, oh, no, I don't race. I just like to beat up on my training partners. And, I thought that was such a refreshing statement because he didn't have any of that, of subversive competition where you're trying to game people or take a drink from your water bottle as you pass them or complain that your knees sore while you're putting in a peak performance effort and all that nonsense. He was very clear that this was what he was all about. And he wasn't trying to restrain himself or discipline his heart rate to prepare for an upcoming competition. And that's fine. So if you just want to release from the stress of your workday and your sedentary habits, and you want to go out there and blast yourself with a bunch of high intensity workouts without monitoring your heart rate or anything, there's no one to judge that as wrong where going slow is right. So what we're talking about here and what the listener brings to the table, the assumptions that you or I are going to make on the show here, is that people want to get better. They want to protect their health. They want to have good energy and cognitive function during the workday, outside of their training patterns. And so when you have all these kind of esteemed goals, then we have to talk about discipline and all those things, but only until you're clear about what your purpose is. And I know, I have to admit, it's not possibly as much fun to slow down and listen to that annoying beep go off when you're jogging up a hill and forcing yourself to walk up the hill and judge yourself as an inferior athlete. And remember, I picked this up halfway through my professional career because we didn't even have heart rate monitors for the early years. And so here I am halfway through. I've trained as hard as I could, and there's still guys beating me on the race course. There's still guys ahead of me. And it's very frustrating because I'm giving my heart and soul to the sport. And I'm like, what else can I do? And guys like Mark Allen, who's someone that we're going to hear from on your show, that's great. He said, look, you got to slow down. You got to take better care of your health. You got to rest more. And of course, when it's time to go hard, you go hard, and that's a given. But first, you have to build that base so that you don't break down and fall apart and struggle from overly stressful training patterns. So, the gateway to greater improvement for me and to becoming national champion when I was a guy who was just behind those good guys that would win the titles and win the Coke Grand Prix and get ranked, the gateway for me was to slow down, take it easy, do more workouts on my own where I just jogged and enjoyed the scenery and enjoyed the time with my dog and didn't worry about, the split times on the course or any of that nonsense. And so I know it's not as much fun to slow down, but I'm also going to say it opens you up to a whole new appreciation for what endurance sports are all about. And that's connecting with nature, being kind to your body, having more energy during the day instead of less, and being a deadbeat couch potato the rest of the time. And all those great things avail you when you make a commitment to aerobic heart rate training.
And longevity in the sport too, as we can see from Mark Allen and athletes like that.
Well, longevity in the sport and also longevity in life is also a nice goal. Yeah, and I was talking to Simon Whitfield, Olympic gold medalist in triathlon in 2000 and silver medalist in 2008, who had a very long and glorious career, now retired. And I said, what are you doing for fitness these days? You still race or have any goals? And he says, I do stuff that's informed by my coach, and my coach is my 80-year-old self.
Love it.
So if all of us, maybe we have Allie as a coach, but we also want to be coached at all times with every decision in life by your 80-year-old self, including your commitments to your 401k or your retirement accounts, whatever you call them over there, but making good, sound financial decisions, planning for the future, all these things that we take for granted. But when it comes to athletics, is this crazy stuff that you're doing now going to compromise your health when you're 80? And that's a big decision. And that's a huge sacrifice that I think most people would agree. No, it's silly. It's not worth it. And I'm in agreement. When I was competing as a professional, I had to take better care of my body so I could go faster, forget about my longevity. That wasn't the highest thing on my mind. But of course, that's important. And it goes hand in hand with, making good training decisions for the next race.
So I still need an answer for my type A personalities out there. So they believe in the concept. They can see it proof with so many athletes, and they go out there and they stick with it. Well, I guess it's a twofold question. Firstly, how do they know that they're getting better and getting faster, slowing down and getting faster? And then also, what's the typical time frame? Because you mentioned that obviously it's not the quickest way to become fit and to be fast, but over time it works. What's the magic number?
I might second guess that answer and say it possibly could be the quickest way because you have so much less injury risk and risk of a burnout or regression due to exhausting the stress response. So if I had a client coming and saying, look, I got a marathon in 14 weeks, what should I do? I would probably devote that entirely to aerobic training. Same with a longer distance triathlon, unless we're talking about an elite athlete like the Brownlee brothers from England, the most incredible physical performers in triathlon in terms of delivering 29-minute 10Ks off the bike. And these guys are truly going fast in an endurance sport. But almost all the participants outside of the elites are actually going slow. And so, the concept of going and doing speed work or tempo or intervals when you're running a 4.5-hour marathon is not really that relevant. Your return on investment for a high stress workout is very minimal. And so the best use of your time, the best return on investment is to improve that base. Now, here's what's cool to answer your question, and then type A needing to get a concrete answer of what to expect is you can perform these maximum aerobic function tests and track your improvement graphically and dramatically in a way that's so rewarding and validating for the commitment that you're making to aerobic training. So what you do is every few weeks, when you feel strong and energized, you head out to the same course every time, same conditions. And I'm going to take the simple example of a running track. And let's say your test is 8 laps around the track, 2 miles. So you always know that you're going to the same venue and running 8 laps and pegging your heart rate as close as you can to your 180 minus age number. So if I'm 50-year-old guy, I use 130. So I'll head out to the track, I'll run my 8 laps and try to keep that thing right around 130. It might be 132 and beep, and I'll have to slow down a tiny, tiny bit and get it down to 128. And then it's 126, then it's 128, then it's 131. And so I'm doing the best I can. And so I'm running around the track at a very, very comfortable pace for most people and just checking the time. So when you cross the line after the 8 laps and you're running 8-minute miles or 9-minute miles or whatever it is, you write that time down in your logbook, your type A logbook, and then you should expect significant improvement, especially if you have a lot of room to improve. If you're a 5-hour marathoner or a 4.5 or 6 or whatever, you should be able to cut 30 seconds off that average mile time or a minute or 2 minutes. And we get all these reports from readers, listeners, Primal Endurance podcasts saying, yeah, I've cut my aerobic time down from 12:45 to 10:28 in the span of 6 months or whatever. I mean, it's not unusual to hear of dramatic improvement in performance by leaps and bounds just by staying committed to aerobic training. And what's happening is you're getting more and more efficient at the same heart rate because you're getting better at burning fat. You're building more mitochondria through the aerobic training, the stimulus of aerobic training, and hopefully healthy eating. And so when you get out there and get your heart rate up to that number, you're able to perform better. And that's essentially the distinctive feature of the first place finisher in the race all the way to the last. the first place finisher is more efficient aerobically than everyone else. So it's almost like the best indicator of your athletic potential is to go do a math test, even though it's kind of slow and boring because it's, you're not pushing it like a time trial and having to focus. You're just dawdling along, listening to a podcast perhaps, but it shows the functionality of your aerobic engine. And it can also predict like your marathon pace that you predictably could hold because we know how long you can last at aerobic heart rates and all that fun stuff.
Great. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And look, I know it works, but just in case we needed to prove it again, go out there and prove it to yourself.
And also, Ellie, if you're not improving and you go out there 3 weeks later and you run a 12-minute the first time, then you run a 12:24, and then 3 weeks after that, you run a 12:31, and something's causing regression, we can know with great certainty that you are living a life that is too stressful and you're not responding to even the comfortably paced aerobic training. So I'm going to bet your entire monthly coaching fee this month that you're not getting enough sleep, you're eating a poor diet, poor nutritional value, or it's still possible to overtrain even at low heart rates if you're putting in too much volume or what's going on. So we can expect rapid improvement. And if not, it's a great checkpoint to say, hey, something's up here and, we need to fix it.
So basically you're saying this is a primal way to train, but you also need to live primally in order to be able to train primally.
Yeah, I keep dropping those comments in about diet because now what we're seeing, and especially we'll hopefully get to that cutting edge part of the keto scene that's becoming so popular, is that because fat oxidation is so important to endurance performance and recovery and maintaining your health, as opposed to that glucose burning, which is very stressful and inflammatory, the dietary choices you make have a tremendous influence on your endurance performance and on your health and your ability to preserve health while you're training.
Absolutely. And look, that brings me to, I don't know 100%, but I heard a rumor that you and Mark were releasing a book soon. And I would love to ask you a bit about that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're jumping right into the keto thing because if you're not familiar with that, the ketogenic diet is an ultra low carbohydrate diet. So it's kind of the most advanced expression of this primal paleo evolutionary style eating, where you deliberately restrict carbs quite severely to amount to 50 grams total per day or below that. And so what it amounts to in practical terms is like you're enjoying abundant servings of vegetables, you're having your salad, you can have some steamed broccoli, whatever, but you're not eating any grains. You're not even eating the high nutrient value carbs like sweet potatoes or wild rice or regular rice or any sort of add-on carbohydrate like a sweetened beverage or even a little treat here and there. So it's a quite restrictive pattern, but it pays off great dividends because it gets you into this kind of altered metabolic state where you're preferentially burning fat and ketone bodies, which are a byproduct of fat metabolism when your carb intake is really, really low. And the ketone bodies are burned by your brain, your heart, and your muscles just in the same manner as glucose. So you kind of become bonk-proof or completely free from carbohydrate dependency, carbohydrate addiction in the daily diet. And this, unfortunately, is a very common side effect of endurance training because you're burning so many calories and most people are exceeding that maximum aerobic heart rate routinely and drifting into the glucose burning zones. And that's why you finish workouts feeling depleted and craving sugar. It's because you've burned off a lot of sugar in the workout. So if you go on this restrictive dietary pattern and get into this keto state, these sugar concerns are completely eliminated and basically you can skip meals. You can go for long exercise periods without any supplemental calories and all these amazing benefits to endurance athletes, but also the peripheral health benefits are amazing. And that's what you're seeing if you sit down and Google keto diet. You'll see the brain research that it improves oxygenation to the brain and reduces inflammation. So it can help with disease risk factors. It speeds recovery. It preserves lean muscle tissue. And, the benefits are on. And it's kind of an exciting, fascinating subject that's pretty new, even though it's been around for a long time. So Mark and I just finished a book called The Keto Reset Diet. It's coming out in the fall of 2017. And we did a pretty comprehensive treatment of it because there's not many books about it now. So we're hoping that it'll be kind of like the Primal Blueprint was in 2009 when it was really the first book to be welcomed in the mainstream, detailing all the facets of evolutionary health, not just diet.
So Brad, you've been eating Primal now for over 8 years, I believe, and obviously that involves a similar sort of style of keto, but a bit less strict in terms of you're allowed more carbs than that. You do have the wild rice occasionally. You do have the sweet potato and that sort of thing. And so how was your experience with going keto?
Well, you're right. I've been now 9 years in a primal eating pattern, and I started cold turkey in 2008. When I got with Mark and we decided to write this Primal Blueprint book. So I said, okay, I got to walk my talk and get all deep into this. So on the spot, I cut out all grains from my diet, and they had a pretty prominent place with, your whole wheat products and your brown rice and your pasta and my giant bowl of cereal with oatmeal and granola every morning. So the last 9 years have been, a nice awakening to the benefits of just eliminating grains and refined sugars from the diet, as well as refined vegetable oils, an important one to throw in there. And so the transition to testing out a ketogenic eating pattern was not very difficult because I'm leveraging a pattern where I'm rarely exceeding 150 grams of carbohydrates per day. By comparison, when I was an athlete, I was probably eating at least 500 every single day in the form of, all kinds of sugars and performance products and energy gels and energy bars and drinks and hot fudge sundaes and giant frozen yogurt tubs and all those things that endurance athletes love to do. So it's a dramatic departure from that. But then to go keto, you just tighten things up a little bit. And it's been a very interesting experience. Mark and I tested our blood every single day and spent, hundreds of dollars on the ketone testing strips and tried out different strategies. And because we have a short show here and more to talk about, one thing I'll serve up is that when you become fat adapted, which is absolutely essential to your health, to ditch carbohydrate dependency and progress toward fat adaptation, and you do that by just cutting out junk carbohydrates from your diet and eating wholesome, nutritious foods. You don't have to sweat every gram of carb that goes down, but you're getting into that nice pattern where you're not eating the nutrient devoid foods. So when you get fat adapted, boy, the idea of relying upon regular meals for your energy is gone. You can burn internal energy storage whenever you need to, gracefully and smoothly, and just exist through your day without, living and dying by whether you get that snack or whether your energy bar drawer is empty or not. So that's a really great revelation. And then as you continue to progress with your level of fat adaptation, you can start to play around with things like intermittent fasting or delaying your morning meal until you're hungry and building up to the point where every single day you're getting these lengthy periods of fasting where, this is known by science, medical science for decades, the amazingly profound benefits of being in a fasted state where your body enhances cellular repair, protects against disease patterns like cancer, and the inflammation is reduced. And everything works better when you're fasting because that's the body's response to become more efficient when you don't have an abundance of calories. So that's kind of the big points about, before you want to split into the little points about keto and what the distinctive features are. I just want to put that big picture out there is that, fasting is good for you. If you're fat adapted, if you're carbohydrate addicted, fasting is just going to make you tired, cranky, and pounding the ice cream later that night. So let's get that clear too, that trying any of this stuff, requires you to build up some momentum with getting the junk out of your diet and eating the nutrient-dense evolutionary foods, ancestral foods.
So it sounds like it's a real step-by-step. Start off primal and don't rush into keto. Experiment a bit with intermittent fasting first. And obviously, even if you've done it for 8 or 9 years like yourself, it can't have been an easy transition into keto.
It's not easy. And I kind of bombed out my first try. I did it 3 weeks and then I just sort of backslid and got really hungry one day and spun out of it. And then I had to come back strong the second time. It was several months later. And that's when I was starting to write the book. I said, you know what? I got to do it right this time and not just dabble in it. And so I went 140 days in my keto experiment where I was pretty darn good about limiting carbohydrate intake to 50 grams a day or less, just to see what it was like and, get really deep into this journey. And I would say it's not the most convenient or practical thing to do forever and ever, because you are kind of having to pass on, great many things which are fun, celebratory, and then secondly, a great many foods that are super healthy. So, when you see a giant bowl of blueberries just freshly picked at the farmer's market, and you're going to pass on those in the name of artificially restricting your caloric intake to under 50 grams a day, that could get old over time, and it might not even be necessary. It's probably not necessary at all, except for certain people that will respond best to long-term sustained keto. So what Mark and I conclude in the book is that this keto stuff is a wonderful tool, a weapon in your arsenal to bust out whenever you want. And probably once a year is a really great suggestion where you take a 6-week period and you go keto and you cut those carbs out and you kind of have this metabolic reset effect where you get really, really efficient with burning fat and not needing even the slightest amount of carbs. And so I'll say, like, after I kind of spun out of the 140-day experiment and purposely started throwing carbs back into my diet, see how I felt. And I discovered that, I had built metabolic efficiency where I can handle a carb slam. I was at a Japanese restaurant. And they made this incredibly handmade dessert with all kinds of interesting things on there. It was like a green pudding type thing with white sprinkled something on top and whipped cream on top of that. So I'm sure there was a dose of carbs in there. And it was delicious. And, I'm going to go get another one someday. But I was able to handle it gracefully because I had built up that efficiency to burn different fuel sources. So that's the ultimate goal, is to just be, to be fit metabolically such that you could handle a carb slam if you happen to go on a cruise or go to a wedding and eat some wedding cake. But then, recalibrate whenever you want by getting into some aggressive fasting periods. Especially if, you want to drop a few pounds. That's the main interest of a lot of people, is they notice for whatever reason, the winter, they stopped training as much and they got 5 extra pounds and they're stressing about it. It's like, look, if you go into keto for 3 weeks, 6 weeks or whatever, the body fat will go away quickly because you're burning it 24/7.
And conversely, if you don't take a cyclical approach and you do try to go beyond that 140 days, let's say you go maybe even turn it into a lifestyle approach, do you think that becomes detrimental, apart from perhaps losing friends and not being able to?
No, I'm not going to say that it's detrimental, because as Rob Wolf says, I heard him on Joe Rogan podcast talking about his recent book, keto is most definitely the human default position, because for 2.5 million years, we were never sure of our food supply. And it's absolutely certain that we went for long periods of time and great numbers of population struggled to obtain adequate calories. So we got really, really good at ketone manufacturing and burning for a reason, because it ensured our survival through these difficult, harsh primal times. So, and it's the same argument that, a vegan or vegetarian can take a wonderful moral stance with very good reasons to not want to eat meat, especially modern meat, which in many cases is crappy coming from the feedlots. But to state that it's unhealthy for a human to consume high-fat animal products is basically ignoring 2.5 million years of evolution. So it's really hard to bite off on that one. Similarly, if someone decides to go long-term keto, there's tremendous records of people thriving for long periods of time and having improved blood markers and improved disease risk factors and beautiful occasions of athletic exploits that are mind-blowing and, directly attributed to that ketogenic diet. It's funny because Dom D'Agostino, who's one of the leading scientists in the world on the forefront of this keto stuff, I asked him a lot of questions during an interview for the book. And he said, I don't know, so many times, or it depends, so many times that I started laughing. And I'm like, dude, that's like your favorite answer. And he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, listen, real scientists are constantly asking more questions and very rarely have definitive answers. And he said, beware of anyone in this game that brings a definitive answer. So my answer is that I'm not going to say it's detrimental, and it's very unlikely, that it's harmful.
So in conclusion, it depends.
That's right. And it's, Maffetone, who I respect greatly, he's pretty much full keto all the time. Nora Gedgaudas, another leading author and voice, is pretty much saying, hey, this is it. This is the way to go. And so for those individuals, these guys are making pretty informed decisions from their position in science. And then other people like Dr. Peter Attia and Dr. Kate Shanahan are of the firm belief that carbohydrate intake is only problematic when it disturbs homeostasis. So when you slam your body with carbs, let's say the all-American breakfast with orange juice, cereal, toast on the side with jam, and then you go sit at your work desk for 8 hours, you are messing with homeostasis because of that insulin spike. And it's absolutely universally agreed that that's not healthy. So if you're going to come home from an 80-mile ride and have a sweet potato slathered in butter with 2 handfuls of fresh blueberries and so on and so forth, it's very difficult to say that that's unhealthy, even if it's going to, put you out of this ketogenic state. It's, humans are versatile and flexible, and, nutrient dense diet. We want to look at these agreeable points rather than get into contention about the specifics. That's my position anyway.
Yeah, great. So in conclusion, just one more question on keto then. Do you think there's anyone out there that really shouldn't approach this diet?
Yeah, I would say that if you've been carbohydrate dependent for a long time and you have signs of metabolic damage, which include high accumulation of excess body fat, difficulty skipping a single meal without getting tired, cranky, moody, and hungry, signs that you're not metabolically fit, you're going to probably look at a longer performance curve than the person who's having minimal complaints about their diet, body composition, and so forth. And, that said, it's very likely also that the people who benefit most from keto will be the obese and the metabolically damaged. So to work toward that goal of, getting really strict about limiting your carbohydrate intake because it has damaged you so severely, that's a big deal to, let's say, the sedentary population. And guys like Finney and Volek, who wrote The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living and The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance, getting into the details of how cyclists perform better when they're keto, they write in there that this is it's of more interest to cure the obesity epidemic rather than help some biker climb a hill faster. So it's a great goal to aspire to if you're morbidly obese and you want to get yourself out of the high risk factor with your blood. And if you're a fit athlete and you're performing at, long distance endurance efforts, you might not benefit as much and you might not need it as much, but it might be something that you could try as a tool once a year for 6 weeks, and it could put you over the top since you're looking for an edge at much greater intensity than a person who's ill and just trying to get healthy.
And potentially it could, I guess, lead to a bit of burnout if you are on that chronic cardio cycle and you try something like keto.
Oh, yeah. Good one, Allie. Excellent. I mean, that's why in our book, Primal Endurance, we're trying to organize a book and structure the chapters. And it's like the book is about endurance training. And, we thought about putting the diet up front, but we realized you shouldn't even talk about diet until you slow the F down. And if that's going on, or I'll throw in that same category, if you're not sleeping enough, there's no reason to talk about any sort of dietary modification or goal or even endurance goal. It's like you got to get your sleep handled or you shouldn't even train. You should just sleep more instead of train. So, we're looking at in the emergency room, the hospital workers are looking at triage and they're looking who's bleeding the most, and that's the person they're going to treat first. So with this thing, if you're in a chronic training pattern and someone tells you, hey, don't eat that pint of ice cream every night, it's not going to hold. You're going to eat it anyway because you're constantly depleted and your brain is craving sugar. So we got to get that stuff handled before we get into the juicy stuff.
Great. So obviously your transition, I guess, from being a bit of a chronic cardio athlete to then halfway through your career changing to much more of a primal sort of lifestyle, you're now living a fairly fit and healthy lifestyle. Do you consider yourself healthier now than you were when you were racing?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I raced on professional circuit from age 20 to 30. And that decade, I would say, aged me to the extent that when I was 30, I felt like I was 80. And I'm not kidding. I'm being, as distinct as possible because I got out of bed and I was exhausted. And it was at the end of my career, so I knew I had to quit. I wasn't on top anymore. And the accumulation of training and travel had just worn me out, where I woke up every morning and I did not have that snap in my step, and all my workouts were slower than they used to be. And it was like I had accelerated the aging process, like the funny movie where who's in it, Brad Pitt or something? He gets old really fast. He's got that disease. And so
Yeah.
that's what any elite athlete is looking at. It's like the cost of, peak performance, lowering your time at Olympic distance triathlon from 150 to 146, comes at a significant cost to your overall health and even your aging. So from that time, when I stepped off the race course and started to recalibrate my goals toward wellness and longevity and all that great stuff, I feel much more healthy. And also my fitness is more broad and functional now. So now I can do sprinting, I can high jump. I high jumped 5'5" last year. That's 1.65 meters, I think, which is, one of the ranked guys at my age, because I'm over 50. If I were to compete in the meets, I'm right up there. And these are things that there's no way I could do that when I was a skinny little endurance geek that was good for three things: swimming, biking, and running. So I think I have a broader base fitness. My diet is much healthier. My testosterone, I blog about this. Did I say brag or blog? Sorry, excuse me. But my testosterone levels are higher than they were when I was an athlete, and I'm 52 years old. And that's a pretty good marker for male aging that you want to look at, is your free testosterone and your serum testosterone. And mine are in the 95th percentile for a young man, because I take care of myself. And, when I was an athlete, they were on the very low range of normal and often outside of normal range. So I was what do they call that? A low T guy who I could have gone into the doctor's office and got therapy with my blood values. Of course, I couldn't, because I was competing as an athlete and getting drug tested, but I was a mess, and it was all a consequence of overly stressful training patterns. So I'm glad to answer that question, because I want to be an inspiration to all the people that are deep into this thing and possibly into overly stressful training, dietary, and lifestyle patterns, and suggest that you listen to your 80-year-old self, if not an old washed up athlete, to say, look, there's a better way to do this that doesn't have to come at that great cost.
Interesting you say that, because a lot of people in our sort of community in Asia, there's a couple of people that come to mind who are probably the fittest they've ever been, and definitely come across to anyone else as being healthy and fit, and have recently had a few incidences with their heart. Last people in the world that you would think would have a heart attack or any sort of heart issues. Is that a common theme across other, like, say, professional athletes?
Oh my goodness, yes. And if you look on Mark's Daily Apple, you can type in the search bar "case against cardio," and there's part 1, part 2, part 3, and continue. We've talked about this theme of chronic cardio for a long time in the books and Mark on the blog. And it's an epidemic that fit endurance athletes are coming up with heart problems and elevated disease risk factors due to the chronic nature of the exercise. So the heart is like any other muscle. It gets inflamed, it gets stressed during a workout. And then when you get home and rest and balance yourself, the heart repairs and recovers. And, it's no worse for the wear. But if you go out there on a day-to-day basis, especially a cyclist or in a non-weight bearing sport like that, where you can really peg your heart at a high level for 3 hours a bloody day for years and years on end, what you're doing is you're over-stressing the heart and causing small scarring to occur on the delicate ventricles of the heart. And when that happens, that scarring and that inflammation, what's happening is you're compromising the electrical signal that's so important to get the heart beating properly. And you get AFib, atrial fibrillation, because the atrium has been damaged by chronic training. And so these extremely fit specimens are coming in and delivering, either dropping dead tragically during workouts, or finding out that they need a pacemaker or they need surgery. And at a certain point, we can't let it be shocking anymore. We have to understand that this is a risk factor of chronic training, and take inspiration from the people that have this misfortune and understand the risks.
Yeah, great. Okay, so peak performance and health, are they mutually exclusive?
No, I think the humans are pretty strong and resilient, and we're built to, push the limits. And I think, like the great philosophers used to say, the body follows the mind. So I think a lot of this is really healthy to wake up in the morning and have a goal of, climbing a mountain, finishing a race, keeping in shape, delaying the aging process by going out there. And I used to love to coach youth sports with my son, and I'd like to go out to the 14-year-olds basketball team and dominate these guys because I could. And then when they turned 15, they dominated me. But, for a while there, I was number one on the team when they were 12, 13, and 14. I was like, come on, bring it on, man. Let's go. And I was like, who's this old freaky coach? But you have to constantly pursue, competitive challenges and have something that lights you up in the fitness realm to be the best that you can be and get the most out of your body. And there's so much science about how exercise enhances brain function and builds more neurons and prevents against the decline, intense exercise and endurance exercise. So, to have these wide-ranging goals and a balanced, active lifestyle. Katie Bowman, one of my favorite authors, she talks a lot about the importance of just general everyday movement. Forget about training and sports and physical athletic performance, but just being more active throughout the day. All these things go hand in hand with enhanced cognitive function and anti-aging and all that fun stuff. So they're not mutually exclusive unless you make them that way by blatantly ignoring your health in the name of peak performance.
Love it. And look, thanks very much, Brad, for all your insightful tips and information. And we'll link to all of the things you discussed in the show notes. We're going to have to get you back on the podcast again, especially after your keto book comes out, because I'm sure we're going to have more questions around that. But before we let you go today, we've just got one question for you, slightly random, nothing to do with, well, maybe health and fitness. Do you have a tattoo?
When we taken a survey, I have no tattoos, but you know what? I'm for sale. So if some company wants to pay me, I don't know, $1 million or something, I'll throw a tattoo somewhere. But
funny you should ask that, because
yeah.
I was actually just wondering whether you might be happy to have Ali Fitness on your forehead.
On my forehead, that would be a tough one, but I appreciate you asking, and it's probably a good idea for brand building. Just get everybody tattooed.
So you've never sort of been close to getting a tattoo, or?
No, and a funny one, like my friend Andrew McNaughton, who's an old-time top professional triathlete, frequent guest on Primal Endurance podcast, he likes to tease triathletes that have the Ironman logo on there because it's so common to finish the race and then go get an M. tattoo. And he says, so did they pay you? That's a corporate logo. Did you know that's a corporate logo? Did they pay you to put that on your body? Because you're advertising for them. Didn't you pay them to do the race? And it sort of like, catches them in their tracks because it's like, oh, you're right. It's a corporate logo. And, corporations should pay to advertise on your body, I think.
Absolutely. So if the money's right, then maybe you'll consider one in the future.
Yeah. Or, what are those life-changing events that you see that people wear tattoos, and it's an interesting part of culture. It's got that individuality. So what I do appreciate is that it's, culturally acceptable now, rather than, back in my time when I was young, tattoos meant like biker dudes or people in prison. And that's kind of silly. And so, the more acceptance we have of all kinds of different lifestyles, orientations, all that stuff is progress for humanity. So bust out the ink. I'm an appreciator of the art, and who knows, you might see me inked up one day. I don't know.
And it might say slow the F down or something like that.
That would be a good one.
Excellent, Brad. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Ellie. Good luck with the show. It's wonderful to have you on we can go across the ocean and pull up a podcast now. We don't have to, touch in person, but maybe someday.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ali.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.